look, there are a lot of good questions and valid critiques about how Graham Plattner became the nominee. But it's worth noting that every major Democratic figure, from Chuck Schumer to Bernie Sanders, have unequivocally called on him to drop out of the race over these allegations. Just like every major Democratic figure called on Eric Swalwell to drop out of his race just 3 months ago. Meanwhile, Republicans have spent the last decade showing us time and time again that when it comes to holding their own members accountable, they're either unwilling or incapable or some sad combination of both. And that is the real choice voters will face in every single race this November. Joining me now to break all of this down is Amy Walter, editor-in-chief of the Cook Political Report, and Jim Messina, former campaign manager for Barack Obama. Okay, Jim, I know you've been taking this all in. You are a political animal in your soul, after all, just as I have over the past couple of days. What do you make of where things stand right now in Maine?
Well, look, I can't believe that Plattner and his team think that they get to decide who the Democratic nominee is. This, Amy, really pisses me off. It's just insane. Like, when you cause this, you don't get to decide. When you've lied about your actions for months, including personally to all of us, you don't get to decide. When you are trying to figure out like how to, if you're staying in this race, you don't get to decide. It's like he thinks that he's going to make this decision. And the fact is, and Amy talked about this in some of her tweets today, he's been underperforming more than every other Senate Democratic candidate in America. When you look at this state, which is a 7 or 8 point Democratic state, when you look at the national mood, he still only had a 2-point lead. He had his own problems. It's not like, his people are saying, well, he's got this movement and everyone needs to get his movement. Democrats in Maine have to decide who is going to be the best candidate to win in the general election. And that is someone who can win women voters. Susan Collins continues to overperform these elections because she overperforms with women voters. And so it's not about a Graham Plattner endorsement. It's about who the women of Maine want to see as their next United States Senator.
And I want to dig all into the process. The executive director of the Maine Democratic Party actually just posted a video to your point, but we're going to play that in a second. But first, I want to ask Amy about this because I think there's been this perception, right, that Plattner defied political gravity, right? You hear that over and over again. I've probably said it, so I'm going to do a mea culpa here. But despite all, he seemed to still kind of hold on to some semblance of support in Maine, even as these controversies came out. But it sounds like part of your data analysis is that he was underperforming other candidates, and maybe that was an overstatement. But what do you make of how much he was able to hold on to and what he lost? What should people understand about where the numbers actually were sitting even before the last couple of days?
Yeah, well, Jen, I think you made a good point in your opening, which is even with all of the baggage that he had, as these Reddit posts that he had made came out, as a lot of the opposition against him came out, support among Democrats did not wane. I was actually in Maine that week that the first round of Reddit posts came out. And what I heard from people who were actually at a Plattner rally that day say is, number one, we still stand behind you. And number two, we are convinced that this is the work of Democrats in Washington. This is the sort of thing that Washington insiders do to undercut real grassroots sort of establishment, people who go against the establishment type of candidates. Mm-hmm. And I think if we learned anything from this race, it was that two things can be true at the same time. Number one, the base is hungry for somebody who is new and different, who speaks like somebody who is from the real world, not somebody who's from Washington, not somebody who's been in politics a long time. The second is that the candidate of the establishment, Janet Mills, was not very well liked within the Democratic Party in Maine. She was respected, but they weren't dying to see her run in that slot. And so put those two things together, and let's give Plattner his due. He is a very talented candidate on the stump. And I think that also won voters over in the state. But fundamentally, I come back to the point Jim and I have been making the same point. you know, if you're running a candidate in Montana, as Jim has done, you want to find a candidate who fits that state and makes up for the deficiencies that Democrats have in that state. In Maine, this is a blue state. This is not a red state. Democrats to win here do not need to win Trump voters. They need to win over voters who have consistently voted for Democrats, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and yet have also voted for Susan Collins. Those voters, as Jim and I have both noted, are women, overwhelmingly women, especially working class women and women who have a college degree. That is where Susan Collins does best. White working class men, we've talked so much about that group of voters, who's going to appeal to them. If you look at the 2020 exit polls, Joe Biden and Sarah Gideon, who was the nominee in 2020 against Susan Collins, both did as poorly with white men as the other. Both lost them by 30 points. It was the women where Biden was able to really outrun Gideon.
It's such an important, I mean, ultimately winning is about winning more votes. I mean, it's about how you get there. Look, okay, Jim, you mentioned being pissed off. Quite pissed off, I get it, about the Plattner team thinking they have a say in who the nominee is. And we just were able to pull up what the executive director of the Maine Democratic Party just posted right before we came on air online about the replacement process. I want to play that because I think a lot of people in the party have this like PTSD from 2024. So it's about where we go from here. But let's play that and we'll talk about it.
The integrity of this process is just as important as the outcome, and we are committed to ensuring that Democrats across our state can have confidence in both. Unfortunately, Graham Plattner's team has repeatedly reached out to us in an attempt to put their thumb on the scale of what this process looks like. We have repeatedly reiterated to Graham Plattner's team that they have no role in determining our next Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate, nor in determining what this process looks like.
Okay, that sounds right to me. I think the question is, what is the process going to look like and what should the process look like? Because they have a time limit here. First of all, Plattner has not yet dropped out. I think he's going to. He has until Monday the 13th. Then they have about 2 weeks to have a new candidate. So, Jim, you've thought a lot about keeping coalitions together. What should this process, give them some free advice right now, look like?
Well, first of all, hallelujah to the executive director of the Maine Democratic Party. She's exactly right. And that was her telling the Plattner team and Graham Plattner to go jump in a Maine lake. The process should be very, very grassroots. It should be very holistic. It should be incredibly transparent. You already see some candidates out tonight talking about their interest in running, laying out policies. You know, they ought to over-index on very clear, very transparent, and very grassroots. And I think those were the things that people didn't think happened during the 2024 presidential selection for very good reasons. I don't want to relitigate it. But a lot of people were pissed about that process. And my advice to Maine is just go back to what you're good at, which is grassroots, and run a good process that people feel like they have a say in their next candidate, because you're going to need every single person to beat Susan Collins in November.
Amy, I'm sure people might start stopping you in the hallway or the street if they aren't already to ask you who can actually defeat Susan Collins, as they do about every state. Is there enough known about any of these candidates to even have data or know the answer to that question? And let me ask you a two-parter, because there has been this belief that you can transfer, which I don't believe, support from, say, Graham Plattner, his support from some working class voters, to another candidate. Like, say, that's the argument for Troy Jackson. Give us your take on that, too.
Right. I do not believe this conveys, like, you buy a house and you get the refrigerator with it. You don't get to convey that with candidates. But it goes back to the concept here of who is the right candidate to defeat Susan Collins. If you're the Democratic Party, that's the number one question that you need to ask. And we've actually had an opportunity, Maine Democrats actually have had an opportunity to do that in a gubernatorial primary that had a lot of candidates who came from lots of parts of the state, from the ideological spectrum. And we can go back and look at those candidates, how they performed, what they talked about. I think those are folks who also had to go through the process of running for office. They have voting records. These are the sorts of things that Maine voters have already been grading their candidates on. Obviously, this was for a gubernatorial race, not a Senate race, but they know who these they know who these candidates are, and they've already made that choice.
So there's a lot of people out. I mean, we're going to start.
There are a lot of people out there who didn't win that nomination. Exactly.
That is true.
Who could be in the mix. And Troy Jackson's one of them, but he's not the only one.
That's true. I said there's a lot of people putting out there, if people demand I serve, I will serve. That is how I'm defining all the candidates coming forward.